everybody, and welcome to, it's been a while, but welcome to our J70 webinar about the 2021 Midwinters coming up in Davis Island next month. I'm Alex Curtis out here in Newport Beach, California. I'm joined by Zeke Horowitz in Annapolis, Maryland. Zeke, you there?
I'm with you, Alex. How we doing?
Good. We decided to wear our party shirts to get ready for the big occasion down in Davis Island. It's always times, good sailing, and just, you know, good vibes off the water as well. So we're really happy that you guys could all join us tonight. We're going to cover, well, I guess we're going to start by saying that this is a new way that we're going to do webinars, and we're giving it a try, and hopefully you guys like it and we can kind of continue forward. But all of our presentation is just questions that you guys have submitted to us, and we're going to try to do our best to answer them. With that being said, we're going to open up the chat immediately. So if any of you guys have any additional questions or have questions on what we're saying, we really encourage you guys to be interactive and to submit in the chat box anything that you might like to add, and we'll do our best to kind of put it into what we're saying. So Zeke, what's your favorite memory of this great series? I mean, we're there 4 times a winner. What do you got? What's your favorite part about Davis Island?
Well, it's always fun. It's kind of a blur. It's hard to keep all the races straight, but there's one race in particular that really sticks out that happened to us last year. I was with the Imperia team with John Heaton and company, and it was one of the typical lighter air northerly days down on Hillsborough Bay, and very difficult to predict. Shifts huge from one side or the other, and we were playing the right side of the course. We're sort of interested in this other fleet that was going on over there. There was a big group of ladies sunfish that were sailing around in the right corner of the racetrack, and you know, we got on port and we were heading towards them. Things were looking okay, pretty good, and then this huge left line came in, and we were just getting further and further behind all the time. And we just the more the breeze shifted left, the closer we got onto the ladies sunfish course. We got like right into the middle of it, and we're just becalmed. Well, the rest of the J70s were basically at the leeward mark by now, and we were over there kind of jockeying around with this lovely group of women sunfish Sunday cruisers. So that kind of stuck out. It's easy to have a good laugh while watching the rest of the J70 fleet sail away from us. So we hope to improve upon that and try to avoid the sunfish group this year down there.
Yeah, it's a total jungle ball place. It's one of my favorite places to go sail. You know, there's so many shifts and puffs and all sorts of different just variables going on at one time. And I'm really looking forward to getting back there. So why don't we start? This is you guys sailing. This is the mighty Imperia team. You guys had an awesome Worlds campaign this year. You and your team, and skippered by John Heaton, you guys always try to put your best foot forward. One thing that really sticks out internally in our group is how well your guys' sails are always sort of set up. You know, why don't you talk a little bit about the relationship of the leeward sheet and the inhauler, and, you know, what leads you to the certain geometry that you get to in, let's just say, flat water conditions that we might see in Davis Island?
Yeah, I think good point, Alex. We're going to try to spend most of tonight talking about kind of Davis Island specific conditions. The first thing that comes to mind is flat water. It's always really flat, so we'll try to kind of point the conversation in that direction. But yeah, the inhaul on the J70, super critical, super important tool that we're all kind of learning to deal with and learning new techniques for. And it's very complicated. Depends a little bit on which jib you use. We use the J2 Plus for all of last season. We're actually going to give the J6 a try this winter, which is the flatter sail, which requires a little bit more inhaul. It also kind of depends a lot on where your rig tension is in a certain race, therefore what your head stay sag is and how much you really can inhaul. But kind of assuming you've got your rig tensioned up reasonably in the ballpark, I think the easiest way to think about the inhauler is setting up the foot of the jib so that you have a nice seal around the cabin house. So something that we really focused on last year. Our coach really was harping on us about that. And what I mean by seal is that you actually want to bring the foot of the jib and the clew, like, so that it overlaps and will touch as much of the cabin house as you can get away with. That gives you the end plating effect and is basically giving you more sail area by connecting the sail to the deck. So it's the same reason you want to have a little bit of scoop in the foot of your jib going across the deck. You don't want to have a gap between the foot of the jib and the bow up there. That's for end plating. And for that same reason, you want to have the foot of the jib nice and round around the cabin house with a nice seal down there, at the same time that you look up and have your leech looking correct. So by leech looking correct, you have the bottom of the jib, like you can see in this photo at that very bottom draft stripe, is very well hooking to weather. And the further you go up the sail, the next draft stripe up still would be hooking to weather. The one above that would be pretty, just a tiny bit hooked to weather, mostly straight. And then the top one, pretty straight with flow on those upper telltales. We also use those reference marks on the spreader up top to make sure we're in the ballpark. Typically speaking, you want that leech to be kind of between the outer two tapes on your spreader while you're achieving that seal on the deck in the cabin house that we were talking about. So there's a million ways to get there. It depends on the conditions a little bit, where your rig tension is with the head stay, but I think that's the general visual cues that I look for to get us into the ballpark there. And now thinking about specifically towards Davis Island, is a flat water venue. You can typically trim your sails quite a bit harder in the really, really flat water, as long as there's enough breeze. So you would accomplish the same thing, but you might bring the upper leech in a little bit tighter, maybe in between the inner two marks on your spreader rather than the outer two, with the same kind of foot seal. So I don't know, I generally don't touch it because I'm terrified. It's a very complicated sail to trim, and I've got all the faith in our jib trimmers on board Imperia. So luckily they take care of most of that for me. But is that basically how you do it as well on your team, Alex?
Yeah, exactly. And the only difference is in light air, when you're trying to power the boat up and you sail with more head stay sag, you just basically want the clew just off the cabin housing. So the more head stay sag that you sail with, the more you're just moving that whole geometry of the clew outboard. And I would say in general, you want to, like what you alluded to, is keeping the clew in a similar area or similar space, close to the cabin housing, and letting the lead do the work. If you really want a fuller sail, moving the lead forward. If you want to move the lead aft and the head stays getting firmer and you want the foot to be flatter, let the lead do the work in the shape and kind of keep the geometry between the inhaul and the leeward sheet very similar. And that will kind of create a little bit of consistency. And then making sure that you have really good jib marks. I mean, the jib marks have to be symmetric from side to side. You got to have an inhaul mark and a leeward sheet mark. And in a place like Davis Island, where you're not really worried about asymmetric trimming, as soon as you get to a spot where you feel as though you're going fast and you're going well on the guys around you, really make note of where those sheet marks are and try to make them as repeatable as possible. You agree with all that, Zeke?
Yeah, I think it's spot on. And I think just an important summary on what you're talking about with the head stay is just think about the more you inhaul, the more you're kind of bringing the leech up to weather, and you're also powering up the sail, and it's going to push the head stay further to leeward. So you're moving the front of the sail to leeward while you're moving the back of the sail to windward, the more that you inhaul. And that is sort of made more dramatic if your rig is loose. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you get caught out there and all of a sudden it's, you're set up for 5 knots and it's blowing 15 knots, it's going to be hard to inhaul as much because your head stay is going to get much too saggy quickly when you inhaul hard.
Yeah. And you touched a little bit on the differences between the J2 Plus and the J6. Why don't you probably sailed more with the J6 than I have. What are some of the key differentiating characteristics between the two sails, would you say?
Yeah, there's some minute details that make them much different. The easiest way to think about it is the J6 is just a flatter sail than the J2 Plus is kind of everywhere. The most dramatic place you see it is up in the upper half and in the head of the sail. The J6 is quite flat, and it was sort of designed so that you could inhaul really, really hard. And we still inhaul the J2 Plus. Probably not as hard as we inhaul the J6. The J6 needs to be inhauled. So coming out of tacks or off the starting line or around leeward marks, it's really important to get the inhaul on the J6 quickly. Otherwise, the upper leech gets pretty open. But in very flat water venues like Davis Island or Charleston, places like this, that sail can be quite a weapon because it's nice and flat. You inhaul it really, really hard, and it can kind of depower a bit quicker and just kind of flatten out your whole sail profile and give you, which ultimately gives you a little bit less drag, which is fast in flat water, maybe not quite as fast in choppy stuff.
Sure. So, the last question here is how quickly do you inhaul out of a tack? And the answer is immediately. This, especially if you have a J6, the sail doesn't start working until the inhaul is on. And as you alluded to, the inhaul is what helps power the jib up. And the best technique, Jake Ladow, he's our jib trimmer. He's a really, and Will Felder, another really good jib trimmer, and Zach, they have their preset marks, like what I was alluding to before. And when they come out of attack, they get their leeward sheet to like 80% of the way in, and then they take the slack out of the weather sheet. As hitting the rail, they're cleating the inhaul at the same time. From there, they'll pull the inhaul in all the way to the mark, leave the leeward sheet at 80%, and the boat builds speed and you get to your target speed, then they'll lean in and they'll do the final little press. Would you say that that's kind of the typical?
Yeah, no doubt that I mean, you're spot on. Get the inhaul on as fast as you can. And what actually we've adopted on Imperia, Zach Mason's the primary jib trimmer, Will Felder sits forward, and we've got the marks like you're talking about that are kind of right there on the deck in the normal spot in front of the block. We've also added whips on the sheet where the windward sheet meets the block that's on the jib lead itself. And the reason that that's there is so that as Zach is tacking the jib with the sheets, Will Felder crosses the boat and gets into a hiking position right away or wherever he's going to be, but he actually grabs the sheet, the weather sheet, through the weather jib lead block as soon as he gets up in that forward position, and he just pulls it. It's usually about as hard as he can, and he uses those whip marks as a reference along that clue block, or sorry, the lead block, and he just holds it for as long as he can until Zach is able to get the weather sheet into the cleat. And so maybe it saves only a second or two that it takes Zach to get it trimmed through the cleat, but it's important, and that's how fast we want to get it on. Sure. And the other thing I was gonna talk about on the weather sheet trimming is once it's set, I know Zach likes to leave it in the cleat in a spot where it's at its max ease, and they'll kind of sit on the rail and play the weather sheet as we're sailing upwind by just banjoing it right behind their backs, and they kind of trade off because it's a tiring effort. But if you put your weather sheet in the cleat in its spot where it's the most eased, then it gives you the ability to just reach behind you and banjo up on that weather side of the boat between the cleat and and the jib lead, and they can just lean on that really hard if we get in a spot where we want some extra power in the jib. They want to round out the bottom a little bit for a little bit or try to help the boat point. And if we get in a spot where we needed ease, we want to put the bow down, they just let it go, and the leech opens up a little bit and makes it easy to press and build speed again.
Yeah, and you can see in this picture, Zach is doing exactly that, and Jake does a really good job of that too. And to go back to your whipping marks, if you don't, sometimes, you might get to a regatta, you might not have the ample amount of time to get all the geometry down. The visual cue in that would be if your bow person is to pull the inhauler and just watching the clue start to get to the cabin housing. And if the clue can get really close to the cabin housing, and as the bow person, you can just hold it there for the jib trimmer to catch up to you, then you've won. You've gained that, extra 2% out of tax. And at the top of the beat in flat water with 70 boats all coming together, 1 and 2% adds up quite quickly. So, just those small little visual things that if you're showing up and you might not have 2 days of practice or 1 day of practice, just if you can take away from that, just the clue on the cabin housing for the inhaul is a very visual thing that I think everybody can kind of get their head around.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just out of tacks as well. It's you can help the boat accelerate out of mark roundings, coming right off the starting line, anywhere that you can. Coming out of ducks, oftentimes, if you got to do a big duck and the weather sheet gets eased, as the jib trimmer is pulling it back on, that forward person can get you big gains by just trimming that inhaul on right away before the regular jib trimmer can even get to it.
Yeah, nice. So let's move forward here. This is a question about mainsails. I wouldn't necessarily call it trim, but just the models. Zeke, you're an F1 guy. Why do you like the F1 so much? You've obviously tried everything, and why is that the sail that you've kind of settled on?
Yeah, sure. So the F1 main is the flattest main that we offer. It was kind of designed in mind for the Selden rigs, which are typically a little bit stiffer. And we put it up. I've never actually used it on a Selden. I've only used them on Southerns of varying degrees of stiffness, but I just happen to like the flat main. I like that I can pull backstay on and see the main invert, not only down low, but kind of all the way up. It gets flat really, really quickly. And so to me, that just makes it a bit more of a versatile sail. I feel like most of the time, what the struggle in the J70 is in the lighter air, trying to develop pre-bend in the mast in an effort to get the main flat enough when the mast just won't bend the way we want it to. That's usually a bigger struggle, than getting it full enough and getting enough power in the main when we need that. So I just like the fact that I can have a main that can get flat in conditions that I want it. I feel that, the flat sail gets you a little bit maybe of an easier time at the top end speed. And then when you don't want it to be flat, you can either change your tuning or sail with less backstay or ease the outhaul and really develop plenty of depth there. The XCS-4 also is a relatively flat main. It's a little bit flatter than the XCS-2, which was the last main that we were using, the crosscut main. So that's the primary difference, is that the F1 is a little bit flatter. And I think, Alex, you've spent some more time on the XCS2, so probably have some good tips on the, slightly fuller XCS4.
Yeah. In Southern California, and now our team is going to Europe, and we're starting to get ready for Monaco. We really don't sail in a lot of flat water venues. So our team is always working on where that crossover of power versus balance is. So this past year, we elected to use the XCS2 for the Marina Del Rey Worlds, and now we're starting to experiment. We're using the F1 in Europe, but we're going to start this winter out with the XCS4, which is it's flatter in the head than the XCS2 by about 2 or 3%, and it's probably similar depth but more draft aft in the middle stripe, and also in the bottom stripe as well. Just slightly flatter, slightly more draft aft. You don't have to sail with as much pre-bend. In the XCS2, we're aiming for like 2 3/4 inches of pre-bend to make sure that the knuckle doesn't get too far forward. With the XCS4, we can sail with more, closer pre-bend to the F1 numbers, where it's 2 2 1/4, and we can sail with the lower slightly tighter at base setting, and I'm looking forward to making the switch, and I think it'll be good on our mast is slightly softer on our American boat than a lot of ones that we've deflected and we've tested. And, the XCS4 is going to fit the slightly softer mast better than the F1, where the F1, you need to have spreaders forward or really stiff column mass. So to be able to sail with, the rig as straight as we want it to fit the luff curve. So those
Right.
tuning differences is all in the pre-bend and primarily the lower shroud tension.
Yeah, exactly right. So if you're using the F1, you might have your lowers end up being a little bit tighter, a little bit faster than you would with the XCS4. I guess, one thing to think about, especially for the Davis Island flat water stuff, is flat water means there are not the moguls out there that are going to slow the boat down. There's not much out there slowing you down, and it's all about trying to get to the top end speed. And once you're there, it's relatively easy to stay there because there isn't the chop slowing you down. And getting that tippy top end speed is all about kind of decreasing drag and making things flat. So whichever sails that you're using, I think it's important to think about, once you've gotten up to speed, how do we flatten everything out, decrease drag, and get that last little 1 or 2% of boat speed? And I really feel like in this J70 class these days, that's where the fastest boats are getting everybody else. Everybody is fast these days. It's a really stacked fleet, but it's, you're in the knife fight to get off the line. Generally, you have a little bit of fuller sails coming off the line. You're trying to point, you're trying to hold your lane and get going. And then once the crowd thins a little bit and there's some more open water, it's all about how do we flatten everything out, trim really hard, and just get away from the blob, as I call it. And so I think thinking about flat sails that you can trim hard is really what you want to be thinking about down there. That's one reason I like that F1 main in a venue like Tampa.
Yeah, for sure. You're totally right. There was a question from Steve Lowry. Are the spreaders adjustable on the J70? The answer is no. But masts are all different. So, you know, if you, it's a big circular conversation that we can have with you guys individually outside of this forum. But we do have ways of knowing, okay, do I have a stiff mast? Do I have a soft mast? And if you have questions on how to do that and what that process is like, you know, feel free to contact us individually. So let's talk a little bit about downwind. You know, flat water, downwind, place like Davis Island where the wind is typically 12 to 14 knots, and it can get super windy. You know, this picture is of my sister and my brother-in-law ripping downwind. Maybe is in Miami, but still, you know, tons of mode changes. I spent all last year as the primary spinnaker trimmer, so I'll take this one on. But the question is, how do you find optimal downwind sailing angle when you're in displacement mode? And you know, before this, I told Zeke, I was like, it's kind of a weirdly phrased question, so to speak, but he came up with a good point. Understanding the relationship between the boat speed, the hull speed through the water, the heel angle, and the curl in the spinnaker. So when I'm trimming the spinnaker, you know, I sail with Doug Rostello on the team Good to Go. When in our pre-start routine, we establish what our target angles are or target speeds are, upwind and downwind. And downwind, it's super important. So we typically like to sail around some guys, get feeling good. And let's just say our magic number is 5.2. So 5.2 is our target downwind speed. So we'll be sailing downwind. We'll set the spinnaker. We're in the train. We're going 5.2. Now we can start to mode. So what I'm always trying to ease the sheet and head down. That's what we always want to do. In an ideal world, we're easing the sheet and pointing at the mark. So how much curl is too much curl? I would say a panel to a panel and a half. If you're curling at a panel and a half and the speed is crashing, you need to head up and trim in. If you're easing and the speed is increasing at a panel width of curl, then you're probably starting to get in the ballpark. So it's a constant push and pull between the trimmer, the helmsman, and the helmsman too. You know, one thing that we've worked a lot with Doug on is catching the boat as it's starting to slow down. You know, as the helmsman, you have the power. You and the trimmer generally will start to feel when the boat is starting to decelerate at the same time. And so the helmsman needs to be diligent about heading the boat up, you know, the crew weight moving to leeward, getting the sail full, trimming the sail in, and then flattening and going straight. So there's certainly some kinetics involved in that. And it's definitely really hard to find VMG at times, especially in a venue, in a puffy venue where sometimes you might feel slow, but you're in a pack and the wind is coming from behind and all these guys are catching up to you. And you don't quite know, am I doing the right angle? In those moments, you just need to stay patient and sail against the boats around you and not try and worry too much about what's coming. Just sail in the wind that you're in. So those are my kind of, you know, cliff notes on how to find the correct mode when downwind when you're displacing. You got anything to add, Zeke?
Yeah, you know, I think that was all really, really good. I had only a couple things to add, you know, since the question is really about displacement mode. I just immediately want to remind everybody that the J70 wants to sail downwind. It wants to sail deep when it's in displacement mode. It doesn't like to be bow up. The VMG gains seem to be taking it as low as you can go until you can even wing, which is even better up until you're at 15 knots. So that tells you everything you need to know. The boat wants to sail downwind. So think of it sort of like you would think about a J22 or a J24. I hate saying it. But, you know, you want to be a little bit rocked to weather if you can. You don't want to be heeling to leeward. And it's all about getting the spinnaker to rotate. They're pretty deep, full spinnakers, and they want to rotate to weather, as Alex was saying, ease and head down. And you basically want to carry the boat on that edge just before you feel the spinnaker about to become unstable. If you feel like the clew wants to start kind of folding in towards the luff, that's how you know you're getting a little bit too low. But before that, I think you want to, it can be very good to get greedy and sail as low as you can with a lot of rotation. And it's really important, as Alex was saying, to keep your eye on that speedo and not necessarily just a target speed, because it changes a lot when you're going downwind. Little puffs, little angle changes speed dramatically. Try to keep an eye on what the trend of the speed is. As we're sort of trying to get greedy and get deeper and lower, watch your speedo. And, if it drops a tenth, but then maybe picks back up a tenth and drops 2/10, picks up 1/10, you're in the ballpark, because it's not just crashing. If you try to get greedy, the kite loses a little bit of power in it, a little tug in the sheet, and all of a sudden you've dropped 3/10 or 4/10 and it's not coming back. You know that you've crashed and you need to do a kind of a big turn back up to reattach. So target speed associated with that little bit of heel and as much rotation as you can get. And really, I would say focus on that trend of what the speedo is doing. And lastly, just being that it's Davis Island specific stuff that we're trying to talk about again, your mode is going to change a lot based on where the puff is and how it's moving. A lot of times we see these very tiny kind of personal puffs or really localized puffs to your boat or your little pack. And it can be beneficial to sail really, really deep. Even if it's lower, even if you're a little bit too slow for the amount of wind that you have, you might be making tremendous gains on the fleet because you've got this little personal puff. And if you can stay in it for an extra 5 seconds, you're killing it. So it's a bit dynamic based on the exact bit of velocity you have as well.
Yeah, I'd say it's super dynamic and crazy and really fun. So
it's the best. It's the greatest place to sail ever.
I'm not going to go that far, but it's a really nice place to sail.
Better than Monaco.
It is better than Monaco, but then you come in and you're in Monaco. So that's pretty nice. So let's talk about the venue. You have a good nickname for this place. What do you call it?
Oh, I call this place the Thunderdome.
Yeah, and
you go in here and it can be a world of pain. It's a knife fight everywhere. We're bouncing around, and so it's the Thunderdome. And more so this year, 64 boats, I think, one starting line, one course, I believe.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. So I when I go down there, I don't really worry about current. I got enough to worry about with puff and shift and starting line and boats and not hitting people. So what do you think about the current?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's important to recognize that there is current. It's more important to recognize that the wind and the shifts are more important, generally speaking, than the current. I think the only thing really to note, and if you're kind of looking at this screen, maybe you can find it, Alex, but that upper right, just on the east side of Davis Island, there's a port up there, and there's some deep water. So kind of on the a little to the left of there, I think. Right, going in there. That's like a shipping kind of channel that goes up in there. So water is a bit deeper, and the water does move quite a bit. Usually our course is a little bit further west than this circle is. And so that channel is really only in play either on the far right side if we're in a northerly, or the very tippy top of the course if we're in an easterly. But that is an area to look out for, because the water does move in and out of there pretty quickly. But again, I would agree with you that I think, wind shifts and pressure outweigh current most of the time. But for things like weather marks, ley lines, things like that, you definitely want to keep it in mind and get some observations on the way out to the race course.
Yeah, for sure. So, there's 60 boats, 5 minutes goes off, you look up the course, and I have no idea what is going on. How do you manage the starting line? Talk us through a little bit of your routine and what you like to do. And you're really good at starting. So how do I get starts like you?
Oh, thanks, Alex. That's just luck. Well, you're right. I mean, so again, venue specific. We were talking before the call, and we're saying, so bigger lines. What are the trends? Big fleets, big lines. The first thing that pops out is line bias, because if the one end of the line is a little bit favored compared to the other in a small fleet, doesn't really matter. There's not a lot of leverage. When you get these 60 boat fleets, and all of a sudden the starting line is quarter of a mile long or something like that, it's a ton of leverage if the committee boat is favored by 5 degrees. It's just a huge head start by starting up there. So you want to keep that in mind. I recommend getting bearings on the line, a compass bearing, comparing that to the wind that you're observing, as well as the course axis the race committee has. But in a venue like this, the wind's shifting through 5 or 50 degrees every couple of minutes. And I think, the most important thing in a venue like this is being able to be on the lifted tack, pointing at the mark ASAP. So what can you do to achieve that? Everybody's popular phrase is find the low density, start in low density. And that's exactly what you want to do. How do you do that? I don't know. It's not that easy. It comes from, I think, lots of observations and early observations from the big picture right away. I recommend having a kind of repeatable strategy where the boat's going to be in the same place at 3 minutes in every start, no matter where you want to be. And from that point on the line is where you want to take kind of your first observation of, man, it's really kind of stacking up at the boat, or just an awful lot of traffic down at the pin, or people are just kind of hanging in the middle, unsure yet. And just kind of keep updating that big picture observation on where the crowd is setting up. Take that into account if you see them all kind of like it's going to be a knife fight at the pin. There is no reason to be in the knife fight trying to win the pin in a 60 boat fleet at Davis Island. It's not going to win you the race. Full stop. It just isn't. So say, well, we want to start third of the way up or whatever, to avoid the big picture blobs. And then in the little picture, like you're in your final kind of 1.5 minutes to go and you're trying to make your final decision, is where you really need to start kind of thinking a couple steps ahead. And where are the boats that are on starboard that are going to peel off the boats that are on port behind me and open up this hole? Is it going to be a tack or is it going to be a jibe? I know, that it can be a pretty strong move to do a jibe rather than a tack, to get from port to starboard in your final approach off the train, as long as you make sure you're close enough to the line and there's enough wind. Don't recommend doing it less than a minute, or if it's less than, 5 or 6 knots. But, if you recognize you're pinned, you're sailing on port in the train and somebody's right behind you and there's a big blob and they're not going to let you out of there by tacking, just recognize it early, jibe out and sail back upwind on starboard and kind of keep your options open.
Yeah, I think that's all really good stuff. And the 2 things that I would add is definitely checking to see what the line bias is, but align yourself with the first piece of pressure, especially in the easterly and the northwest winds. I don't know why those 2 directions kind of stick out to me the most, or northerly and the easterly. But you get these big bands of pressure that come from the sides, and very I'm used to sailing in the ocean where the wind comes straight down the course. And in a place like Davis Island, the wind comes from the right or it comes from the left. And a lot of times, you get to the top and there's boats in converging pressure coming towards one another, and you're not 100% sure which wind is going to win out. Same thing at the bottom of the course. If the pin is favored 5 degrees, but there's no wind there, it's maybe better to start up at the boat in a ton of wind, and then you're going, almost, you're going a knot faster and the bias goes away immediately. So aligning yourself with the first pressure is super important. And one thing that I do there is, I figure out, I kind of hang out on the starting line at 4 minutes. I try to identify where the first piece of pressure is going to come. And then I'll bear away on starboard and I'll let the train form kind of below me at like the 50-meter mark. And I'll find the low density part of the train and I will jibe into that low density part. And then from there, your options are much more open, because you don't generally, when you jibe in that part of the train, there's nobody trying to ram it into your transom or trying to dodge you. You can either decide if there's low density behind you, you can lee bow the pack and start just to leeward of it. Or if there's one guy on your tail, you can duck a starboard tack boat and tack, and they kind of serve as a blocker and you could build your hole that way. But, those just sort of, that's my way of like cheaply finding the low hanging fruit that is the low density in the train. So that it's worked, okay. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the best starter, but it's, gets you out into the course and you can play the game. The worst feeling is when you have a not so good start, the wrong end, and now you're like, now crap. Now I got to hit every single shift and find every single puff. And it's a venue where a lot of times the rich do get richer. So you have to you know, if you have aspirations to be in the front, you got to start in the front too.
Yeah, and I love what you said, Alex, about like what you do it the same every time. You're up in the same spot at 4 minutes, you sail down into the line and you join. And I love that you have a repeated way of doing things. And I would say to anybody that doesn't, I would just absolutely develop one, whichever one works best. Maybe it's just going past the pin on port jibe between whatever 245 and 315, whatever your strategy is going to be, make it repeatable, because that's the way that you learn. That's the way that you start observing what the trends are. That's the way you start saying, oh, that is what low density looks like. And oh, like this is what happens if I jibe from port to starboard at 70 meters and 45 seconds left in the sequence. It's not going to go well. And that's just that's how you see kind of the same plays happening repeatedly, and how you capitalize on learning from those mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. All great points. And Zeke, we've done a great job of covering a lot of topics, you know, like we both agreed, this is a super dynamic, very unique, cool venue. And, you know, North Sails is putting a big emphasis on this whole winter series. We're the presenting sponsors. And I think we have a metric ton of North Sails representatives who are going to be down there. There's going to be 12 of us. So if any of you guys have any questions, please feel free to come seek us out. We're there to help you guys and, you know, and try to make the most of your guys' experience. Zeke, you got any last words to the greater masses?
No, I think you nailed it. I think that, yeah, we're definitely inviting you guys to come walk up to us. We'll be the guys in the North Sails jackets down in Davis Island. And we're really looking forward to seeing as many of you as we can and helping however possible.
Cool. Well, cheers, Zeke. You know, we're ready to go. We got our party shirts on.
Ready for the tropics, baby.
Yeah, we're ready to get down there, and we're really looking forward to seeing everybody soon. So until next time, we'll see you guys down in Florida.
Thank you.